afternoon, Chair Merman and fellow committee members. I'm Megan Hunt, MEGANHUNT, and I'm here to present LB1224, a bill about preventing child victims of abuse or neglect from slipping through the cracks. The intent of this bill is not to stigmatize homeschooling or restrict the rights of parents to educate their children in the way that they believe makes the most sense for their family. I have seen some confusion and misrepresentations of this bill circulating, and I'm always happy to hear feedback from Nebraskans who are watching and listening to what's happening in their legislature. And I want to assure anybody with concerns about this bill that I have no intention of preventing them from educating their kids in the way that they choose, and I encourage them to listen today to what this bill does. I got the idea for this bill from reading a story in New York Magazine, which I just distributed, about an 8-year-old girl in rural West Virginia who died as a result of abuse and neglect inflicted by her family. This little girl in the story, Rayleigh, showed signs of abuse for months, which some of her teachers had reported to CPS. Clear signs included cigarette burns, seasonally inappropriate clothing, and frequent pleas for attention and affection from her teachers. One day, Rayleigh arrived in a wheelchair with a broken femur, which her family blamed on a temper tantrum in which they said she kicked a wall, despite her mild nature and no signs of a broken foot. Upon returning from summer break in her final year, teachers noted that she looked like a skeleton with black circles under her eyes, shaky and pale. Teachers would give her food in the bathroom during break periods. The family started complaining to the school that the teacher's CPS reports were harassment. As Rayleigh's signs of abuse continued to worsen and concerns from school staff and medical professionals were elevated, Rayleigh's primary abuser, her father, withdrew her from public school to homeschooling to keep her out of sight of her teachers. Upon hearing the news, one of Rayleigh's favorite teachers warned the superintendent, "She's going to end up dead. That baby's going to die." There were no grounds for the school to intervene because in every state, including Nebraska, parents are allowed to withdraw their child to homeschool in the midst of a CPS investigation, and there's nothing that school administration can do to stop it, even if there are clear signs of abuse in the home. Tragically, in Rayleigh's case, 2 years after she was withdrawn to homeschool, she was discovered unresponsive and died of cardiac arrest, her little body covered in bruises, cuts, and burns. The medical examiner noted signs of sexual abuse and sepsis caused by pneumonia, noting that any layperson would have known that she needed immediate medical attention. After a year-long trial, 3 of Rayleigh's family members were ultimately found guilty of negligence leading to the death of a child. The judge in his ruling in West Virginia noted that he found the state responsible as well because it allowed the child to be homeschooled without any measures to ensure the child's continued education and safety. Since Rayleigh's story came out, since I read it in that New Yorker article, or New York Magazine, lawmakers in West Virginia became the first in the country to try to pass a bill to close the loophole which allows children to be pulled into homeschooling during an active child abuse investigation. As conversations around the issue gained media attention, more reports of similarly tragic stories of abused homeschoolers emerged. Another story of a little boy abused at home in West Virginia and Connecticut and New Jersey. My goal with this bill is to codify a temporary layer of protection for children that may be slipping through the cracks with undetected abuse. The vast majority of parents who homeschool their children are loving parents who would, of course, never abuse their child. But for those who are intent on inflicting harm, many of them who did not ever intend to homeschool their child, homeschooling does provide an effective cover. Child abuse and neglect are crimes of isolation. When children are kept home, it's far more difficult for social workers to interview them or for non-familial adults to try to get them help. LB 1224 prohibits the withdrawal of a public school student into a homeschool only for a limited period while an investigation is underway. Only about a third of reports of child abuse are even accepted for investigation, meaning DHHS Child Family Services staff have determined that the report seems legitimate or severe enough that it must be followed through. In most cases in Nebraska, a Child Protective Services investigation takes up to a maximum of 45 to 60 days, and current regulations require that the department complete the investigation within 60 days. So in the vast majority of cases, it's wrapped up within 2 months. The right to homeschool our kids is still protected and affirmed under this law, under this bill, by the landmark Meyer versus Nebraska case, which found that parents, not states, have the right to raise their children. However, in that decision, the court also said that the state has the right to make reasonable regulations when it comes to the well-being of children. Under LB1224, no presently homeschooled child or family would be affected. Nobody who's currently homeschooling would be affected. And anyone who wants to homeschool their children at some time in the future will be allowed to do so. Only parents of children under an active, accepted abuse investigation will be temporarily limited from withdrawing their child from public school, so the kid already has to be in public school. If there's an active child abuse investigation, they will be temporarily prevented from withdrawing their kid from that school until the investigation concludes that the child is safe in the home. If you're already homeschooling, or you know somebody who wants to homeschool, or you know that you someday want to homeschool, you're going to be okay under this bill. This is a time-limited layer of oversight just for those terrible cases where a parent uses the homeschool loophole in order to perpetuate abuse. One of the first steps that Child and Family Services workers take after receiving a report of potential abuse is to contact the child's school to get information about the child's living situation and attendance to identify any possible red flags. They then go to the school to talk to that child. That's important because that school allows for a safe, neutral place to speak about their experience without the watchful eye of a potential abuser. If a child has already been removed from public school, a proper investigation becomes nearly impossible. And with time and distance, perpetrators can inflict even more harm, as in Rayleigh's case. I've also heard from multiple school board members, especially in smaller communities, who have raised concerns with the State Department of Education about homeschooled children known to them in their towns who may not be having their needs met, wanting to know what can be done. And the answer is you can't really do a lot, but an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, and this is one small way that we can keep eyes on children at risk of abuse while they are already in public schools and allow for some intervention before it's too late. The second component of the bill states that individuals convicted of child sexual abuse or sexual assault cannot be a teacher or a supervisor at a homeschool. This is aligned with what we say for public schools. We don't allow teachers in public schools to have these convictions related to sex crimes, and this aligns that expectation for children who are homeschooled. I'd also like to uplift some comments from the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, which is an organization founded and run by homeschool alumni that advocates for oversight of homeschooling informed by research and lived experiences. They write, quote, "Policy loopholes that leave children in danger are a reality of homeschooling across states, and the one you identified is key. We maintain the Homeschooling's Invisible Children database, tracking abuse cases that have made the public record when homeschooling is present. And over 1/3 of abuse cases involve withdrawal from school under the circumstances that you cover in LB 1224, 37%. The reality is your bill won't impact purposeful homeschoolers. We agree that homeschooling can be an incredible opportunity and a great educational fit. LB 1224 closes a gap where the most vulnerable children are at risk, and families who are homeschooling should be in full support. We know there is always significant pushback from organizations that believe parents' rights, not children's rights, should be central to homeschooling. At CHRE, we are firmly in support of your efforts to pass legislation that protects children from non-purposeful homeschoolers, proven by research and well known by homeschool alumni. Something we've heard in debate a lot over the last few years is that if a bill can just help one person, if this can help one person evade harm, then it's a justification, then it's worth it. And I would argue that this is one of those bills that I can promise you will help one person. It will help many, many children. And I think that it's a good expectation to have of homeschooling parents. while preserving the rights of parents to homeschool and balancing that with the safety of children. Thank you very much.
Senator Hunt, you're welcome to come up and close. And while she's coming up, there were 9 proponents, 79 opponents, and 1 neutral testifier.
Thank you, Chair Merman and fellow members. I'm completely confident in this bill. I have complete confidence in the validity and effectiveness and that this bill is a good idea. There are some changes I'm willing to make, but I am completely sure that if a person is under investigation for child abuse, they should not be able to take their kid out of public school. And there's ample evidence from around the country as to why that is. And as the previous testifier said, if you are not a child abuser, you have nothing to worry about. This is not going to affect you. I think there's a lack of understanding out there about what this bill really does. And I understand coming into any kind of legislation that affects homeschooling with a defensive mindset. I get it, I understand. I'm asking people to understand what the bill really does. There is no mechanism in the bill that provides for or requires the enrollment of a current homeschooler into a public school when a report is made. There's nothing in the bill that triggers an investigation if someone wants to remove their kid from homeschool. Another thing that is sad but true and real is that DHHS is understaffed. And they are facing budget cuts from us this year. And I think that the idea that they are going to be sending the small team that they have to investigate a report that kids are playing outside by themselves or certain custody dispute type things. It's good to ask questions about that, but when you think about the reality of what DHHS is investigating, they just don't have the resources to do things like that, and I don't think they have the desire to do things like that, to pursue frivolous claims. And that's the job that they have as the experts that we trust in Nebraska to discern which claims are frivolous and which ones aren't. No person would lose their right to direct their child's education based on a false report. This bill retains parents' ultimate right to determine their child's schooling. It just prevents them from transferring their child from a public school to a homeschool during an active investigation for child abuse or neglect, meaning that the department has accepted the report as DHHS testified. If it's a false report, the investigation will determine that, and the parent can transfer their kid into homeschool. They can do what they want. This bill only prohibits parents convicted of child sex abuse and related sexual assault crimes from being teachers in a homeschool. Even then, a parent can still send their kids to a homeschool, they just can't be a teacher in that school. It's the same standard we have for other educators. While we were listening to testimony, a lot of the questions that come up, you Google it so you can be prepared to address it on your close and stuff like that. And I actually came across another article that I just distributed from State Line, which is a nonpartisan media outlet that covers what state legislatures do. And it's from January 29th this year, so this is a really new article that just came out that we didn't catch when I introduced the bill earlier in January. And this guy has been trying to get this passed in West Virginia for 7 years. And it's passed several times with total bipartisan support in the House, and then it stalls out in the Senate because of, honestly, lobbying efforts from well-meaning but very, very confused homeschooling advocates who don't understand what the bill does. I would be really proud if we can get this bill to a place where Nebraska can be the first state to pass a protection that helps these kids who are facing abuse, who are facing neglect, and who nefarious, not well-meaning, not serious about homeschooling at all parents are using homeschool as a shield to cover up for their abuse and neglect. I would be so proud for Nebraska to be the first state that does that, while still, of course, protecting the right, as affirmed by the Supreme Court, of parents to homeschool their kids. One potential amendment that might be a good idea, and I hope that we can talk about this in executive board as well, or executive committee. On page 15 in section 13, line 13, it says, "The subject of a report of child abuse or neglect shall not be permitted to transfer a student." This gets into the kind of meat of the bill. Maybe it should say something like, "The subject of a substantiated report," or an accepted report, something like that. But I think members of the committee understand the intention of the bill and also understand that I'm willing to do what needs to be done to make it as successful as possible. And I appreciate your questions and your attention today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Senator Hunt on the close? I'd have to reread that article about the child in West Virginia. It's a terrible situation that happened. Was that family already under investigation by DHHS there?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think they were. That article really grabbed me too, and I was listening to it while I was driving one night, and I just thought, oh my God, we have to try something like this. Yeah. May I say one comment,
Sure.
Chair? Thank you. I also wanted to uplift an online comment from Nebraska Alliance for Child Advocacy. In lots of these comments online, there's specific examples that speak to what this bill's trying to accomplish, but one thing they said, they have a documented case in Nebraska involving an 11-year-old girl who suffered strangulation and ongoing emotional and verbal abuse. She was kept isolated and homeschooled in the same household as the alleged perpetrators. Despite clear concerns, both investigative parties were frustrated by their inability to intervene due to limitations with current statutes. This situation exemplifies the risk that LB1224 aims to address. When a child is withdrawn from school, they lose access to mandatory reporters, which leaves them vulnerable and trapped with abusive adults. Under LB2024 or 1224, this kid would not be saved if she's already being homeschooled. But if she was around mandatory reporters like teachers, and that abuse was reported and investigated, accepted and investigated by DHHS, she would at least still have that safe space of her school where teachers can help her. And that's in Nebraska.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, that can happen in reverse too.
Absolutely.
I mean, a child can be bullied or terribly at school, and maybe the homeschooling can actually
Abuse
change
does
the
happen in
situation.
public school.
Sure.
Abuse can happen anywhere. And my concern is that this is one aspect of life that is completely hidden from accountability. We already have accountability measures for kids who are abused in school, in church, in private school, at the playground, at the grocery store, wherever. But if they're pulled out of public school to be sheltered in a scenario where they can continue to experience abuse and the adult goes unpunished, then that's something that the law needs to do something about.
Any other questions for Senator Hunt? If not, that will close the hearing on LB 1224.